Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 110, The Elliott Brothers. The inspiration for this episode came from a short clip designed for primary school students on the stories of Anzacs. William Samuel, known as Willie, John Henry, known as Jim, and Frank Elliott were born in Exeter, near Lismore, New South Wales, to Alexander Elliott and Mary Susan Chick. The three boys were from a large family of 12 and all served in World War I. Their father, Alexander Elliott, was Irish and emigrated in about 1881, where he first settled at Burgess Estate at Exeter and was a farm superintendent. He married Mary Chick at St John's Church, Mossvale, on the 20th of March 1883, when William was 30 and Mary was 25. Mary had been born in Wangaratta, Victoria on Christmas Day 1858. She was one of 7 children of Samuel Solomon Chick and Mary Ann Patton. Samuel had immigrated from England in 1854 and he married Mary Patton at Paterson, New South Wales, when she came out to join him in August 1856. He farmed at South Wangaratta. And the death of Mary Chick's father was outlined in the newspaper, the death of Mr. S.S. Chick. The death occurred on Saturday night at the residence of his daughter, Mrs. W. Daines of Wangaratta, of Mr. Samuel Solomon Chick of Wangaratta South after a short illness, the cause of death being senility. He was predeceased by his wife by 15 years. The late Mr. Chick was born in Somersetshire, England, and was 87 years of age. In 1854 he came to Australia. He landed in Sydney and secured employment with Mr. Lyons, who owned a small station on the Allen River, 40 miles from West Maitland. When his intended wife arrived in Sydney from Somerset, he went to meet her, and shortly after they married and lived at the station until 1858. In 1859 they came to Victoria. Coaching it to Wangaratta, they alighted at Meldrum's Hotel, which stood on the north side of Ovens River, and of which later years, an old landmark of early Wangaratta. Mr. and Mrs. Chick's first place of abode in Wangaratta was a little slab house situated where now stands the offices of Notcut and Purbrick. His first employment was the assistant to the late Mr. Riley CE in taking the levels of the embankment approach on the east side of the King River Bridge. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Chick associated himself with his brother-in-law, the late Sylvester Salisbury, and in conjunction they carried on farming on a property on the 1 Mile Creek, fronting Greta Road. A few years later he purchased from the Crown the farm now and occupied by Mr. W. Smith Sr. and made a home, and remained there until 1878. With his wife and family of 8 children, he went again to New South Wales and resided for a short time near Mossvale. Not feeling satisfied, he returned almost immediately to Wangaratta and settled at South Wangaratta. He there carried on farming and dairying until the death of his wife, after which he leased the farm and lived a retired life until his death. Like other early settlers, Mr. Chick faced all the difficulties of pioneering, ploughing with the single furrow plough, reaping the crop with a sickle and cutting the hay with a scythe. The deceased was a member of the Salvation Army for over a quarter of a century. He was always ready to help in any worthy movement. He was strictly temperate and was strong in constitution, never having need of a medical man until he was well over 70 years of age. The late Mr. Chick was held in very high esteem. He survived by a family of 5 sons and 2 daughters. And it mentions Mrs. A. Elliott of Richmond River, New South Wales. There are 37 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. 5 of the grandchildren have enlisted. So the Elliott boys' parents, Alexander Elliott, died on the 31st of July 1921 at Namulji, New South Wales, and their mother Mary lived until she was 91 and died in Lismore, New South Wales in 1950. William Samuel, Willie, was the oldest in the family, and he was born at Exeter in 1884. In the Lismore Northern Star on the 23rd of October 1916. It outlines the conscription and the military exemption court and the cases from the country. It says the Lismore Military Exemption Court at the Courthouse Lismore on Saturday was engaged almost exclusively in dealing with men either conducting or assisting to conduct dairy farms. 54 cases were dealt with, out of which 11 exemptions were granted, 11 were refused, and 19 were granted temporary exemptions, extending over periods ranging from 2 to 6 weeks, and in one special case, about 10 weeks. 20% of the total exemptions were granted. The great majority of these have either been only sons or the only remaining sons of families, which one half or more have enlisted. Several cases came before the court of two brothers. They were heard together, and in most instances the brothers had to decide who would go and who would be exempted. In one or two cases where it was urged that the applicant be conscribed would mean selling the farm, the magistrate pointed out the hardship of a business nature was no grounds for exemption, adding that if someone did not go out and fight the enemy arrayed against us, their farms would have no value for them at all. And William Samuel Elliott, dairy farmer from Namulji, was given a partial exemption until November the 4th. So he was only given not even 3 weeks exemption. So he was 32 when he enlisted in World War I, and he left Australia in January 1917. At the time of his enlistment, he was farming at Namulji, and he sang in the church choir, and he wanted to be a minister. Willie was reported missing in action on the 24th of April 1918. The family received a letter from the chaplain based at Villers-Bretonneux. He reported that Willie was carrying ammunitions with his battalion when he was caught by machine gun bullets. And the letter reads, "From France on the 12th of May 1918. Dear Mrs. Elliott, I wish to convey to you the sincere sympathy of all officers and men of the 13th Australian Infantry Brigade, and my own personal sympathy with you in the sad loss of your dear one, your son W.S. Elliott. He took part in one of the greatest actions of the war, the retaking of Villers-Bretonneux, on the 24th and 25th of April 1918. All did splendidly, going forward in the face of great machine gun fire, and secured a real victory. I trust that it will be some consolation for you to feel that he took part in and helped to ensure such an important success. I know how hard it is for you to have lost one so dear to you, but I feel that he is not really lost. He has truly laid down his life for others, following the example of our dear Lord who gave his life for us all. So I feel that he lives on in him, sharing his reward in that better world as he shared sacrifice in this. So I would not have you sorrow for him, just leave it all in God's loving wisdom. He has taken your dear one to himself, to a higher and better service. I pray that the divine comfort in our dear Lord may rest with you and yours, that you may find his peace and strength in this great loss. We were able to give all a decent burial on the battlefield, and a memorial is being erected near the place. I feel so sorry about this. What a splendid man he was. I feel I have lost one of my best boys. He was so loyal to his church, really helpful to me in my work. He really enjoyed the services. He was always there at his communion regularly, and a splendid example to others. He would sing as if he meant it. I personally miss him dreadfully, but he has been found worthy or higher honour, that of the Lord above, whom he serves so well. He was carrying some magazines of Lewis gun ammunition with his team during the great attack, and had got safely by 2 lots of wire when he must have been caught by a machine gun bullet. I took a service near the spot, covering all with deepest sympathy. I was talking to him only a couple of hours before the attack. He was cheery, confident, and ready for anything." In Willie's war records, as he was missing, there were statements that were taken, and there was a statement made by Private Gallagher of the 28th Battalion, and it states, "Missing 24th of April 1818. During August, I was going up the line on the right of Villers-Bretonneux when I came across the body of an Australian soldier. His gas mask and letter found beside him bore the name 3359 Private Elliott W.S. 52nd Battalion. He appeared to have been dead some months." And this was dated on the 16th of September 1918. And once they identified him, the site of his final resting place was in the Adelaide British Cemetery at Villers-Bretonneux. And on the 20th of January 1920, it says, "We took a train back from Lille to Amiens and took motor to Villers-Bretonneux, where we visited the Adelaide British Cemetery and found the grave of Mrs. Elliott's son Willie. We were fortunate on this, as his parents did not know even of his burial. They only had the news that he had been killed in action and nothing more. This was very consoling for his family to know that their son's last resting place is in a cemetery, and his grave, with the graves of a lot of other dear Australian boys, is being tended to by loving hands. John Henry Elliott, Willie's younger brother, enlisted at Lismore, New South Wales on the 13th of May 1916 and sailed from Australia on the 21st of October 1916. He was wounded in the head and the upper chest on the 4th of October 1917 in France, and after being rehabilitated in England, he returned to the front on the 5th of November 1917. On the 11th of June 1918, his legs had been blown off. He told the medical staff to save someone else, and this was only 5 months before the end of the war. In his war record, there is a letter written saying, "Dear Madam, with reference to the report of the regrettable loss of your brother, the late Private J.H. Elliott, 25th Battalion, I am now in receipt of advice which shows that he was wounded in action on the third occasion, on the 11th of June 1918, and admitted to the 5th Australian Field Ambulance, France, where he died on the same day as a result of his wounds, shell wounds to both legs amputated. He was buried at Querion, the Reverend A.E. Gallup officiating. The utmost care and attention is being devoted where possible to the graves of our soldiers. It is understood that photographs are being taken as soon as possible, and these will be transmitted when available." John Henry and William Samuel Elliott made a pact with a fellow digger, Robert Taylor from Lismore, that if any of them died, the other would visit the family of the fallen to tell them how they were killed. Robert John Taylor was born in Lismore in July 1894. He enlisted on the 30th of May 1916, and he disembarked on the Boona on the 21st of October 1916 and arrived in Plymouth on the 10th of January 1917. He proceeded to France on the 5th of April and was wounded in action on the 6th of October 1917 with a shell wound in his back and a slight wound at the back of his left arm. He was hospitalised in England and returned to Australia due to his wounds on the 10th of March 1918 and was discharged on the 15th of June of that year. Robert Taylor was true to his word and he visited the Elliott family in 1919, and there he met the Elliott's sister, Alice Mary. Alice was born in 1892 and her and Robert married in 1921 in Lismore at St Andrew's Church. And the wedding notice states, R.J. Taylor, late AIF, 25th Battalion, son of Mrs. T. Nutt of Lismore, late of Tregengie. The Reverend H.B. Madden of Port Macquarie officiated. The bride was given away by her brother, Mr. F. Elliott, late of the AIF 25th Battalion, and a mate of the bridegroom, both enlisting and sailing together. Alice and Robert had one son, Raymond, in 1922, and Robert died in 1961 and Alice in 1974. Frank, the third son, was born in 1893 in Exeter. He enlisted in World War I on the 13th of May 1916 and embarked overseas from Brisbane in July 1916 on the Boona with Robert John Taylor. He disembarked at Plymouth on the 10th of January 1917. He was initially hospitalised with mumps in England in March 1917, so not long after they disembarked. And it wasn't until the 14th of June 1917 that he proceeded to France. He spent 5 months on the front but was wounded in action on the 20th of September 1917 with a gunshot wound to the right foot. And he rejoined his battalion 2 months later on the 19th of November 1917, however was wounded in action only 5 weeks later on the 26th of December 1917 with a shrapnel wound to his left shoulder. And he returned to Australia due to his wounds on the 11th of December 1918 per the Saxon. And in the Northern Star of Lismore on the 7th of December 1917, it says, "Not the least fear. Mr. and Mrs. A. Elliott of Namulji received a letter from the General Hospital from Frank, one of their boys, saying that he and his brother Jack had been slightly wounded. We were in the greatest battle of the war," he states. "I got hit on the foot with shrapnel soon after we started, but I kept on going till the battle was over. I stopped there till Fritz started bombarding us again and a big shell covered us with dirt, and I got a few more slight scratches and was shaken up, so I ducked off before I got any more. I will be all right in a week or two. We may be thankful that we got off so light. I felt just the opposite to what I thought I would have done. I had not the least fear whatsoever, and my nerves stood it really well, considering it was said to be the biggest battle ever fought. Jack got hit in the leg and the hand. He came out before me, although he was hit some time after I was. I have never seen him since, and I do not know if he is in this place. It's an American hospital and a very large place. I was with Bill Anderson from Namulji most of the time, and he was all right when I left him. This paper I am writing on I got out of one of the German dugouts. It will be thought a novelty. We made it warm for Fritz. I got my lot out of him if I should never get any more. Will was to take part in this battle. I have not heard from him lately. And then on the 4th of February 1918, Mr. and Mrs. A. Elliott of Namulji have received a cable stating that their son Frank was admitted to the Shoalden Lodge Hospital, England, on the 31st of December 1917, suffering from gunshot wounds to his left shoulder. This is the second time he has been wounded. So when Frank returned, he married Elsie Barber at the Church of St Paul, Burwood, Sydney, on the 24th of February 1923. Frank and Elsie had a son, John, known as Jack, and daughters, Joan and Dawn. John Alfred Elliott, he enlisted in World War II on the 5th of January 1943 in Bathurst. He listed himself as a dairy farmer, and he was just 19 years old when he enlisted. He served in New Guinea at Kokoda, and he was discharged on the 20th of October 1944. Frank died on the 22nd of September 1960 at East Lismore at the age of 67. And the other Elliott children, Alexander Arthur, known as Arthur, was the second-born child, and he was born at Exeter in 1885. He married Edith Sigley in Lismore in 1924. They had 3 children, and he farmed on the family farm Namulji and died in Lismore in 1969, aged 84. James Thomas, the fourth son, was born on the 7th of May 1887 at Exeter. He married Joanne Elizabeth Duncan Shaw in Lismore on the 24th of November 1922. They were married at St Andrew's Church of England in Lismore, and it mentions that he's the son of Mr A. Elliott of Appamatax, Namulji, and it says both families are well-known and highly respected residents of the district, the bridegroom having had 3 brothers take part in the war, 2 of whom who paid the supreme sacrifice. James and Joanne had 2 daughters, and James was a dairy farmer at Bexhill near Lismore, and he died there on the 5th of May 1954, aged 66. The article outlining his death states that farmer found dead in a dam. A 67-year-old dairy farmer was found dead in a 3-foot deep dam at Bexhill yesterday. He was James Thomas Elliott. Mr. Elliott was floating face downwards in the dam when he was found by his nephew, William John Elliott. He'd earlier been seen walking towards the dam. Mr. Elliott was a native of Mossvale and settled at Bexhill 32 years ago. He'd been in the dairying industry all his life and was associated with various organisations at Bexhill. He's survived by a widow and 2 daughters. His brothers are Arthur and Ernest Elliott of Namulji, Charles Elliott of Ruse, and Frank Elliott of Dunoon Road. His sisters, Mrs. J. Crowther and Mrs. J. Taylor of South Lismore, Mrs. C. Barber of Binnaburra, Mrs. R. Bebb of Strathfield, and Mrs. J. Auld of Wangaratta, Victoria. 2 other brothers, William and John, were killed in action in World War I. The 3rd child, Muriel May Elliott, was born in 1888 at Exeter. She married Clement Edward Williams in Lismore in 1918, and Muriel died in Lismore in June 1970 at the age of 82. There was an obituary for Clement Williams in the Northern Star, Lismore, on the 7th of May 1940. It says, Mr. Clement Edward Williams, 57, a resident of Boat Harbour, where he'd lived for a number of years, died in hospital in Brisbane, where he'd been seeking medical attention. Mr. Williams was born in Victoria, but had lived in the Richmond River district for almost 40 years. He married Muriel May Elliott, the daughter of Mrs. A. Elliott of South Lismore and the late Alexander Elliott, and since his marriage has lived in different parts of the Richmond River. In addition to his widow, 4 sons and 3 daughters survive. The sons are Private Alan Williams, who's on active service in Palestine with the AIF, Edward, William and Leonard Williams, all of Boat Harbour, and daughters Miss Phyllis, Joyce and Edie of Boat Harbour. The 4th child, Charles Leslie Elliott, was born at Exeter on the 18th of April 1890. He married Olive Sparks Bettens at Lismore in 1916, and he farmed at Roos near Ballina, and he died at Ballina in 1954 at the age of 64. And his death was recorded in the paper, Mr. C. L. Elliott. The death occurred unexpectedly at his home at Roos yesterday morning of Mr. Charles Leslie Elliott, 64, a resident of Roos for the past 20 years. Mr. Elliott was born at Exeter on the south coast of New South Wales and was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Elliott. When 16, with his parents and other members of his family, they came to the north coast where they settled at Namulji, where the deceased remained until his marriage. He later moved on to Boori and Conorigan and finally settled at Roos. Mr. Elliott is survived by a widow and 2 sons, Frank at Elstonville and Leslie at Roos, and 3 daughters, Mrs. A. Towner, Ballina, Mrs. H. Golan, Victoria, and Mrs. R. Eggins, Uralba. The 5th child, Isabella Kathleen, was born in Exeter on the 10th of March 1896. She married John Frederick Crowther, who'd also served in World War I, in Lismore on the 6th of April 1927, and Isabella died in Lismore in 1976 at the age of 80. Jane Florence Elliott was born in Exeter in 1897. She married Leonard John Ould in Campbelltown in 1925. They lived at Wangaratta, Victoria, and Jane died there in August 1990 at the age of 93. Martha was born in 1899 at Exeter. She married Charlie Barber, Elsie's brother, in Lismore in 1926. They had a daughter, and Martha died at Bangalore, New South Wales in 1972 at the age of 73. And Ernest Cecil Elliott was born in 1901 at Exeter. He farmed on the family property at Namulji. He did not marry, and he died in Lismore in 1978 at the age of 77.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.